Hello again, everybody. It's yours truly, Barry M, back once again with another video. This time I'm going to be previewing the Week 3 games for the 2024 NFL season, and I've been trying to figure out a way, how should I do this? What should I do to try and make it interesting? Should I just go full in with the numbers and stats, or would that bore you guys? And I'll just try and keep it short and simple. Not too much oversaturation with numbers, just give you what I feel, my gut instinct, and see if that works. So if you don't like it, then that's okay, but you'll really hurt my feelings. Anyway, the video begins right after this short break. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, DraftKings. With a long season of football ahead of us, jump in on all the action playing daily fantasy at my partners, DraftKings. New customers download the DraftKings app and use code BARRY for a free shot at a share of millions in prizes with your first $5 deposit. That's code BARRY only at DraftKings. The crown is yours. With that first deposit of $5, new customers can play for a share of millions in total prizes. All you have to do to play is just draft your roster, and those players earn points based on their in-game performance. You can check out all that DraftKings has to offer via the app or the website. So, what are you waiting for? Download the DraftKings app right now. New customers, use my promo code BARRY and play free for a share of millions, yes, millions in total prizes with just a $5 deposit on the DraftKings app. That's promo code BARRY only at DraftKings. Without further ado, let's get back to the video. Also, real quick, not to brag, but I correctly predicted the Jets were going to win the Thursday Night Football game versus the Patriots. I didn't get the final score right, but I'm 1-0 so far heading into this week. Anyways, without further ado, let's look at the first game, the Colts versus the Bears. A rematch of Super Bowl 41. Both of these teams come in 0-2. The big story everybody wants to know with the Bears is, what is Caleb Williams going to look like? Is he going to continue to look like dog shit the way he did the first 2 weeks, or is he going to improve? I've been a big Caleb Williams supporter for a while, and I think that he's going to turn out fine, but he's just having typical rookie growing pains. But yeah, he needs to obviously get better, as does my large adult son, Tony Richardson, Big Tony, on the Colts. Interesting stat here for those who may care. You probably don't, but I'm going to put it anyway because it's my video. Anthony Richardson has started 6 games thus far in his NFL career, but the only 2 games he's won, he has a 2-4 career starting record. In the only 2 games he's won, he failed to play 35% of the snaps. So he hasn't started and finished a game that he's won yet in his career. He also currently leads the league through 2 weeks with 4 interceptions. But even though quarterbacks are always the biggest names and they always get the most attention, I think the place to look is on the offensive lines. The offensive line and the line of scrimmage is usually where games are really won and lost. The big takeaway stat here for me is that the Colts run defense has been allowing 237 rushing yards per game so far this year. No other team is giving up over 200. So the Colts have a horrific run defense. On the other side, you have the Bears, who they always say the best friend for a rookie quarterback is a good running game. The big free agent acquisition for them was supposed to be DeAndre Swift from the Eagles, and thus far he has only 48 yards on 24 carries, so terrible numbers there for DeAndre Swift. The game basically is going to come down to whether the Bears can finally get their running game going or whether the Colts can finally stop the run. Push comes to shove, I think that the Colts are going to find a way to finally get that win, first real win with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. I think Caleb Williams is going to keep going through growing pains, and I think that the Colts will come away with the home win. I'll say they win 24-14. Cleveland versus the Giants. Let's all take a moment to laugh at the New York Giants for becoming the first team in NFL history to score at least 3 or more touchdowns without giving up a touchdown and still losing in regulation. That's hilarious. We all know that Daniel Jones is terrible. We all know the Giants in general are terrible. The question really becomes, how much longer are we going to try and wait for Deshaun Watson to become good again when he hasn't been good since 2020? We say this every week, but basically that's what it is for the Browns. I mean, I don't even feel like, I'm not even going to go into all the off-field drama and contract drama. Everybody, you guys already know all that stuff. I don't expect this to be a very high-scoring game. Both offensive lines aren't great, but I tend to believe that sacks are more of a quarterback stat. Here is the key stat to look at. The Browns are just 4 for 29 thus far on third downs this season. Just absolutely abysmal. But I'd say that they're going to win this game for a couple reasons. One, they're at home, and more importantly, because they were the best defense in the league last year. And again, the Giants are not a good offensive team. So I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, but the Browns are able to squeak it out. I say the Browns win 17-13. Minnesota versus Houston. During my preseason predictions video, I predicted that the Vikings were going to go 2-15. Well, they're currently 2-0. So it looks like this is the start of a 15-game losing streak. Am I right? No, I'm just kidding. Or am I? Like with most of these games, the game comes down to who has the better quarterback. And although Sam Darnold has done, I guess, surprisingly well, he has a habit of starting off the season really well. He did this a couple times in Carolina before he inevitably drops back down to being Sam Darnold, the former draft bust. The Vikings are at home, so I think Darnold's going to make a couple plays. But CJ Stroud is better. CJ Stroud takes care of the football. But that's really where the real battle comes in this game, is how well will the Houston offensive line hold up. The key stat of this game is that the Vikings enter this game with the most sacks. They have 11 sacks. That's the most in the league. And obviously the Texans and CJ Stroud take a lot of pride in avoiding turnovers. That's going to be the difference. It'll also be the return of Stephon Diggs to the Vikings. Diggs hasn't been targeted a lot this season through 2 games, but he already has 2 touchdowns. I think overall the Texans are going to win. Darnold throws a couple interceptions. I think the Texans win 31-21. Philadelphia versus New Orleans. The Eagles really dropped the ball last Monday versus the Falcons, literally and figuratively. And I'm not mad about it, guys, okay? I'm not mad at all. The Saints have been the biggest what the fuck surprise through 2 weeks of the season. Their offense has been unbelievable. They look like the greatest offense of all time. Derek Carr has been amazing. They've been the surprise of the league. And yet I still am not afraid of them, because we've seen this with Derek Carr many times before, where he'll start off a season well and his team will start off a season well, and then right as you're about to buy into him and finally let your guard down and trust him, he fucks you in the ass. AJ Brown's not going to be playing. I do expect the Saints to run the ball well, but I don't know. Again, I'm always careful of buying into Derek Carr. Carr is due for some regression at some point through the first couple weeks. Yet even without AJ Brown, it's in a dome. Eagles still got pieces offensively. I think their offense should still be good, should still put up a lot of points. But the key stat in this game, going into this game, is that the Eagles have now gone 6 straight games without an edge rusher recording a sack. But despite that, I'm going to put my heart over my head. My head says the Saints, my heart says the Eagles. I think the Eagles are going to win a thriller to atone for their disgusting loss versus the Falcons. I just think the Eagles win this game 31-28. Tennessee versus Green Bay. What a thrilling matchup we have here between Will Levis and Malik Willis, former Titans quarterback. A revenge game, if you will, for Malik Willis, who is coming off of by far the best game of his career last week, but he still basically did nothing. He threw it only like 15 times. And in his defense, he really didn't have to, because the Packers' ground game was dominant and they ran for over 260 yards. And again, much like with the Browns versus Giants game, it's really going to come down to, this game I'm referring to, is going to really come down to which team is able to run the ball better. Because let's be honest, if the Packers don't run the ball well and they have to rely on Malik Willis, then they are in deep shit. And I'm not saying that Will Levis is a great quarterback either. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but I still think he's capable of making 1 or 2 plays every game on his own than Malik Willis is. So if it becomes a battle of the quarterbacks, I would say Will Levis is less shit than Malik Willis. But the Titans have a very good defense, at least so far. The key stat of the game is that Josh Jacobs, who had over 150 yards rushing last week, has not had consecutive 100-yard rushing games since 2022. I think the Packers are going to force feed him so much that he will actually snap that streak in this game. So I expect the Packers to run the ball a lot. This is going to be a pretty boring game. I think as long as Will Levis doesn't have another viral mistake pass like he has had the first 2 weeks, which, let's be honest, was hilarious both times, I think the Titans should win this one at home versus a team with a terrible backup quarterback. But it's not going to be very exciting. I think that the Titans will win 20-10. Pittsburgh versus the Chargers. Well, we all know about the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're perfectly content winning every game by a score of 2-0 with 4 turnovers and 3 interceptions and 5 blocked punts, and somehow they end up winning 9-10 games every year. They've started out 2-0, obviously. Both these teams are 2-0. The Steelers enter the game as slight favorites, but for me, I always struggle to pick against a team that has a better quarterback, and even though Justin Herbert, to me, is kind of like a more glorified version of Detroit Matthew Stafford, I still think he's a better quarterback than Justin Fields, who, despite the Steelers' 2-0 record, have produced just 1 offensive touchdown through the first 2 games. There's just fucking disgusting to watch. I hate them. The Chargers aren't exactly a pretty team to watch either, so this should be a terrible game that I probably won't be watching. Pittsburgh so far this year, the fewest offensive snaps of any team in the league because they just love to run the ball and chew up clock, as do the Chargers. We all know the Steelers are elite defensively and the Chargers have a bunch of talent defensively, so it should be a low-scoring game. The key stat of the game, though, in my opinion, is that J.K. Dobbins, we all know he's having a great season thus far, leading the league in rushing, but he also leads the league in forced missed tackles. And when you're talking about a game that's probably going to come down to field goals in a game of a couple yards, that's important for setting up slightly easier field goals. So I think the Chargers go in and win this game 16-13. Denver versus Tampa Bay. Denver might as well just call themselves Pittsburgh West because they've been terrible to watch and they've been horrible offensively for a long time, specifically since 2014, even though they won the Super Bowl in 2015. But anyway, let's talk about now. Tampa Bay's 2-0, Denver's 0-2. Baker Mayfield continues to look very good after his surprisingly good season last year. At a certain point, maybe this is just who he is with this particular supporting cast in Tampa. The real question here is Bo Nix, and so far through his first 2 games, he has not looked like an NFL quarterback. He has no touchdown passes, 4 interceptions, and has generally just looked overwhelmed. Here's the big difference here. Points per game, the Bucs are 4th and Denver is 30th. The Bucs are at home. The key stat for me is that last week the Buccaneers held the Lions to just 1 touchdown in 7 red zone trips. So the Bucs defense might give up some yards to the Broncos, but if the Bucs can shut down the high-powered Lions offense on the road in the red zone from getting into the end zone, I think they can do well against the Broncos and their limitedly talented offense. I think the Buccaneers win this one pretty handily, 28-10. Las Vegas versus Carolina. If the Panthers were still starting Bryce Young, I would pick Las Vegas in a heartbeat, but it speaks to how terrible Young has been that now with Andy Dalton as a starter versus Gardner Minshew, I feel like it's pretty evenly matched. I feel like Minshew is almost a newer version of Dalton where he's kind of just average, capable of some good plays, some good games, but he's never going to be elite. And I feel like so it's almost like holding up a mirror to each other when it comes to the quarterback position. But like I said, the Panthers can't be any worse than they've been. The first 2 games, they put up just 6.5 points per game. They went just 2 for 22 on third downs. And Andy Dalton, he started the game last year in Bryce Young's place on the road in Seattle and did a pretty good job. The key stat of the game is that Gardner Minshew is completing 77.5% of his passes so far this season. Now, the reason why I say that's the key stat is not because it's some mind-blowing, oh my god, rare number that you can't find. It's that expect some regression from Minshew in the completion percentage department this week, because if he were to continue to be as accurate as he's been, it would by far be the single season record. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think expect some regression. I think that will keep the game close, ironically. I don't think this will be a blowout. I think Andy Dalton will make the Panthers look more respectable than they ever were with Bryce Young, but I think they're on the road with the Raiders at home. I think Max Crosby will make a couple big plays, and that'll be the difference. I think the Raiders will win 24-16. Miami versus Seattle. You may have heard by now, but Tua Tagovailoa is going to be out indefinitely, maybe permanently, with a concussion. So the Dolphins are starting porn star name Skylar Thompson at quarterback, and he has shown basically nothing at any point in his NFL career. But there is some good news for the Dolphins. They should be getting Raheem Mostert back, but even if Mostert does miss the game, they have a very capable player in Devon Achane, who had a monster game versus Buffalo. It was really the only thing that went well for the Dolphins in that game, really. So Devon Achane is capable, and I bring this up because obviously without Tua, even though they still have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and some good receivers, they're going to become a little bit more one-dimensional, or at least they should be. Maybe Mike McDaniel will still throw the ball a lot with Skylar Thompson. I don't know, but I expect more runs, so I think Achane should have another big game for the Dolphins, but I don't think it will be enough. Geno Smith's coming off of a 327-yard game. DK Metcalf is DK Metcalf, one of the best receivers in the league. Jackson Smith and Jigba looks to be coming along really, really well as well. The one bugaboo for Seattle is that their defense has not been good against the run, and with Dolphins probably forcing the run game more this week, that is going to be the key matchup. Key stat for this game, 2 and 5. That is the number of touchdowns and interceptions, respectively, that Skylar Thompson has thrown thus far in his NFL career. So I expect the Seahawks to win this one at home versus a depleted opponent. I say they win 31-14. Detroit versus Arizona. 1 week after losing as heavy favorites at home versus Tampa, the Lions are now going on the road to play a Cardinals team that surprisingly beat the crap out of the Rams, although maybe in hindsight not so surprisingly considering how injured the Rams are by 30 31 points. We've seen this show from Kyler Murray before. His career shows that he starts off seasons playing a lot better than he does towards the end of the season, and thus far this season he's done pretty well. It's obviously far too early to make any drastic conclusions on Marvin Harrison Jr., but will he be closer to the guy we saw in week 2 versus the Rams, or the guy who was non-existent in week 1 versus the Bills? James Conner seems to be the forgotten man on that team. He's a pretty good player. He's averaging almost 90 yards a game rushing the ball, but the key stat here is that Detroit is allowing just 76.5 rushing yards per game and has the best tackling efficiency in the league thus far. Plus, they have Aiden Hutchinson, who's performing like an honorary third Watt brother. Yes, I know there's a third Watt brother, Derek Watt, but he doesn't matter. He's irrelevant. I'm sorry, Derek, but you know it's true. So in order for the Cardinals to win, they're going to need Marvin Harrison Jr. and James Conner, particularly MHJ, to play up to his draft status, but I don't see that happening. I think that the Lions have the better team, even though they're on the road. I think the Lions bounce back from that disappointing loss last week and end up winning this one in a close one, 24-21. Baltimore versus Dallas. This is actually one of the tougher games to pick because both these teams come in pretty desperate. The Cowboys got bent over and shown the 50 states last week by the Saints. But even more troubling, the Baltimore Ravens, who were predicted by many people, including me, dominate in the regular season, much like they have been ever since Lamar became the starter in 2018, and yet they're 0-2. And that might actually be a bit of a tough scene because the Ravens are 4th in net yard differential in the entire league, which is another reason, just a non sequitur here, why using yards to rank who's going to win games, especially when you're talking about defenses, is fucking stupid. Yes, I'm talking to you, Brady fans. Games are won and lost by points. The Ravens also have only turned the ball over twice in their first 2 games. This could be either a positive thing or a negative thing, depending on how you look at it, because hey, that means they might be due for some more turnovers, but Lamar Jackson isn't the problem, or at least really hasn't been the problem, even though he did miss a guy in the end zone at the end of week 1. The Ravens' problems, though, more on defense, which is something you never really say ever. They've given up the most passing yards in the league through the first 2 weeks, which again, yards aren't the best indicator of a good or bad defense, but still, at the end of the day, you don't want to be giving up a shitload of yards. I never said giving up yards is good, and as we know, Prescott and the Cowboys are great at racking up yards, even if they're not always meaningful, and Dak has been pretty nonchalant so far this year, pretty average through 2 games this year after signing his massive contract. The key stat to look out for going into this game is that the Ravens are currently 2nd worst in the league with 173 yards in penalties. So this is a team that thus far has been self-destructing. They've been in position to win each of their first 2 games. They just haven't done it. Imagining them starting out 0-3 is pretty difficult for me to do, so I'm going to say they go into Dallas and win, but it's going to be close, and to do a Stephen A. Smith, I wouldn't be shocked if Dallas wins either. But I do think push comes to shove, I got Baltimore winning. I think they're going to win 31-28. San Francisco versus LA Rams. Well, this is a pretty easy choice. I think we all know 49ers are and should win this game, although they should have probably won last week versus the Vikings, and they didn't. The Niners still aren't completely whole, as they've been without Christian McCaffrey, as we all know, but Jordan Mason has stepped in and done a great job in McCaffrey's place, even if in a vacuum he's not as good of a player. The difference since he's been out has been pretty negligible. Deebo Samuel has once again gotten too fat, and now he's going to have to miss some games to lose some weight. But still, the 49ers have the massive talent advantage in this game, especially now that the Rams are without their 2 top receivers in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. I'm not saying anything that you guys already don't know. The key stat in this game isn't even really a stat, it's just a fact. Tyler Johnson and Demarcus Robinson are the top 2 receivers for the Rams. So yeah, I don't think this is going to be close. I think the 49ers end up winning pretty easily. I'm going to say the 49ers win 27-10. Moving on to Kansas City versus Atlanta. Atlanta is one Saquon Barkley catch away from being 0-2 and Kirk Cousins really being up against it, because up until that final drive against the Eagles, he really didn't look like a guy who you would be paying a crap load of money, which the Falcons are doing. But he looked great and delivered in the clutch against my Eagles, which again, I'm not mad about. Stop asking. However, whenever you're talking about Mahomes, it's always tough to bet against Mahomes unless he's playing against Tom Brady in the playoffs. Then some weird shit's gonna happen because Tom Brady has magical witch powers. I mean, last week and really for a minute now in the regular season, the Chiefs haven't really gotten the best version of Mahomes, and some of that might be because of the influx of 2 high defenses, and Mahomes is more willing to take the check down and the Chiefs are more willing to run the ball. And it's not like early career Mahomes where he's throwing the ball 50 yards downfield to Tyreek every play. But despite despite all those things, I would still personally like to see Mahomes get his stats up, especially now that Pacheco is done for the foreseeable future. They re-signed Kareem Hunt, noted woman respecter, and he's a great backup kicker in case Harrison Butker ever goes down. So maybe they're going to feature Carson Steele, who, yes, is white. That does sound white. There's a lot of questions with Kansas City, but I just feel like this feels like a get-right game for Mahomes and the Chiefs. Even though they're 2-0, this feels like a game where Mahomes looks like early year MVP Mahomes, because that's just what the Falcons exist for. The Falcons really exist in the long run, in the big picture, to just be everybody else's bitch. They might win a couple games every now and then like they did against my Eagles last week, but in the long run, they're always going to fail, and so I think the Chiefs are going to win this game. The key stat in this game is that the Falcons are 25th in sack rate and have only one forced turnover all season, so their front might struggle to get pressure against Mahomes, and if Mahomes has time, he should carve up the Falcons defense, and that's a big reason why I think the Chiefs are going to win this one 35-21. Buffalo versus Jacksonville. My preseason pick for MVP was Josh Allen, and through 2 weeks thus far, I don't see any reason to change that, although he really didn't have to do much in Buffalo's Week 2 win where they blew out Miami on Thursday night. They're at home against a Jacksonville team that just isn't good, or I shouldn't say isn't good, but isn't as good as they should be, and it all goes back to Trevor Lawrence, and this is what it's always going to go back to with the Jaguars? Is that how you want me to say it, people? The Jags, I'll just call them the Jags, just so we can just have some even ground here. If Trevor Lawrence ever makes a leap, Jacksonville can become legit, but if Trevor Lawrence is going to continue to be this average, whatever, caliber quarterback, and I don't know how many times I have to say it, but that's what the Jaguars are going to be. I think the Bills are going to win this game pretty easily. They're at home, and again, like I said, the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, it looked like he had it figured out late there in his second year. He started out last season great, but since the middle of last year, kind of seems to have regressed again. The good news for Jacksonville is that Travon Walker does seem to have improved after looking like a first-round bust after being picked first overall a couple years ago, so at least that's something to look at, I guess. But I think if you ask Jacksonville fans, they'd much rather see Trevor Lawrence bloom as a superstar instead of Walker. But either way, I think the Bills win this one. The key stat is that Jaguars have lost each of the last 7 games that Trevor Lawrence has started. They're 0-7 in their last 7 games with Trevor Lawrence as a starter, and that's why I think the Bills win this one 31-17. And finally, Cincinnati versus Washington. The Bengals continue to be in this weird spot where they're viewed as one of the elite teams in the AFC, but they tend to start slow. I heard a stat that said under Joe Burrow, so Burrow's been in the league 5 years, in the first 2 weeks of the season, they're 1-9 over 5 years. So the Bengals start terrible, even in the seasons when they're good under Joe Burrow. They were able to avoid starting 0-3 each of the last couple years, and they're at home on Monday night versus a Washington team that won last week, kicking 7 field goals, not scoring a touchdown. They have a rookie quarterback, Jaden Daniels, who hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in the first 2 games, but has still easily been the best rookie quarterback thus far, which is a pretty low bar. But still, the Bengals, I thought Joe Burrow played pretty well for the most part versus the Chiefs. I thought the Bengals, again, were a couple plays from beating Kansas City there. So it's not as if this Bengals team is terrible. It's not as if, oh, there's no hope for this team. They should win this game. I'm just saying that. The key stat that I'm looking at in this game is 97. That's the number of yards Jamar Chase has so far this season. I expect him to break out in this game, have a huge game, probably go over like 150 yards and a touchdown or 2. The Washington pass defense is not very good, so I think that Jamar is going to expand greatly on his season totals and finally break out, and also not throw a temper tantrum, cost his team 15 yards. I think in the end, the Bengals end up winning this one pretty handily at home on Monday night, 31-10.